Hey guys, tonight we step back into a world without neon signs, drive-thrus, or convenience stores, a world where hunger still found its way into every crack of medieval life. Picture yourself trudging through a foggy cobblestone street at dusk. The air is thick with smoke from distant hearths, mingled with the faint, mysterious aroma of something fried or sweet. It's a scent that beckons your curiosity and, honestly, your stomach. Welcome to the shadowy corners of medieval junk food where the unexpected was served up on plates and in pockets, and survival met creativity in the greasiest, most surprising ways. You probably won't survive this journey unscathed or without questioning some of the strange snacks you're about to discover. But don't worry, it's all part of the adventure. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The medieval world was not kind to hunger. Imagine the gnawing emptiness in your stomach as you trudge through a village where the markets have just closed and the kitchen fire is dwindling. For most people, the day's meals were simple, scarce, and functional bread, some stew if lucky, and water or weak ale. But like every human society, there was a craving for more flavor, more comfort, more escape from the daily grind. This craving gave birth to what we now loosely call junk food. But don't mistake medieval junk food for the processed, neon-bright, fast-paced stuff you know today. This was a world where food was local, raw materials were seasonal, and cooking technology was basic. No microwaves, no deep fryers, just open fires, iron pots, and human ingenuity. The absence of convenience forced creativity that sometimes worked, sometimes didn't, but always told a story. Historians still debate how widespread snacking actually was back then. Was it a rich man's luxury, or did peasants have their street treats too? Archaeological digs and written records hint at bustling market stalls selling fried dough, cheese curds, and preserved fruits. In the villages, cooks experimented with what they had: turnips, apples, honey, and wild game, and fashioned snacks that ranged from surprisingly delicious to downright strange. Picture yourself standing before a vendor's cart, a warm plume of steam rising as something golden and fried comes out of the skillet. It's a simple snack, but it promises a moment of warmth and satisfaction. In these moments, you glimpse the humanity behind the hardship. Hunger is universal, but how we feed it speaks volumes about culture, economy, and survival. Medieval junk food was often about textures: crispy, chewy, crunchy, and flavors that could punch through the blandness of everyday meals. It was comfort food before the term existed. Sweet, salty, spicy, and sometimes bitter. The snacks were as diverse as the people who made and ate them. Let's consider sugar. In a time when sugar was a rare and precious commodity, sweets were treasures. Honey was the primary sweetener, sticky and golden, used sparingly to elevate cakes, breads, and fruits. Candied seeds and spiced nuts adorned banquet tables. But for most, sweetness came in unexpected places, like the slightly burnt crust of a fried dough or the tang of dried fruit. Yet, medieval snacking was not all sweetness and light. Preservation was key. Dried fruits and smoked meats were staples that could travel and last through harsh winters. Their textures were tough, their flavors intense. Eating these was an endurance test of your teeth and patience, but the payoff was calories and sustenance. And then there were the snacks you might hesitate to try: blood pancakes, pies stuffed with unusual game, or cheeses that squeaked with every bite. These weren't just food. They were a way to stretch limited resources, to honor seasonal hunts, and sometimes to celebrate festivals with something a little more extravagant. You can almost hear the crackle of fires, the clatter of pots, and the murmur of patrons in a tavern as these snacks passed from cook to hungry hands. They were shared, traded, and sometimes thrown in mild food fights, human moments immortalized in history's crumbs. As you listen, think about your own snacks, your chips, your cookies, Your late-night cravings? There's a strange comfort in knowing these impulses are ancient, rooted in the very survival and social fabric of humanity. So tonight, we walk the streets of medieval towns and markets, peek into kitchens where resourcefulness meets flavor, and taste with our imagination the greasy, sweet, and sometimes bizarre delights that made life a little more bearable. Ready your senses and your patience, because what comes next might just change how you see that simple bag of chips forever. Imagine the sights, the flickering torches casting long shadows, the murmur of patrons crowding around a smoky hearth, the scent of roasting meats mingling with the musty smell of fresh bread. People from all walks of life, nobles in velvet, peasants in rough wool, come together in these moments for something more than food. They share stories, laughter, and brief respite from the endless toil of their days. This scene was not unlike your local late-night street food market, minus the neon glow and trucks, but filled with the same vibrancy and life. Medieval cooks used every available ingredient. Bread was the cornerstone, dense, heavy, sometimes stale. But stale bread wasn't waste. It was soaked, fried, or transformed into a base for other dishes. Allebread, for instance, was bread soaked in beer and then fried or baked, a humble but filling snack that warmed hands and bellies alike. Cheese was another snack staple, often made fresh and soft, curd-like, sometimes slightly sour, eaten in bite-sized pieces. Unlike the melty, stretchy cheeses we know today, these curds squeaked against your teeth, an odd but beloved texture, and fruit fresh was rare, except in season. But dried fruit was common. Raisins, figs, dates, often tougher and chewier than today's soft versions, were prized for their sweetness and long shelf life. There was even experimentation with shapes and preparations. Turnip pies, for example, might sound unappetizing now, but these pies enclosed mashed, spiced turnips in thick pastry, protecting the filling from dirt and pests, and making them portable meals for travelers or workers. On the meat front, things got wild. The word meat was flexible pork, mutton, venison if you were lucky, but also rabbit, pigeon, eel, or even hedgehog, anything that could be hunted or trapped. These were seasoned, minced, and wrapped in dough, sometimes flavored with herbs like fennel seeds that added a sharp, licorice-like punch. Fennel was one of those spices people either loved or quietly endured. It wasn't just for flavor. It was believed to aid digestion, especially after heavy meals. Sweet, candied fennel seeds often accompanied the end of a feast, much like modern mints. And speaking of sweets, honey cakes were a medieval classic, dense and sticky. They traveled well and were hearty enough to survive being dropped or stepped on. These cakes were as much social currency as food gifts, bribes, or even passive-aggressive statements wrapped in sweetness. Historians still debate how refined medieval junk food really was. Some evidence suggests that street vendors and cooks could be surprisingly inventive and skilled, turning humble ingredients into flavorful treats that gave people moments of joy amidst hardship. At the same time, many snacks were far from delicate or pretty. Bread soaked too long became mushy. Fruit could be tough on teeth, and some combinations were downright strange by today's standards. But this messiness and unpredictability were part of the charm, part of life. As you imagine these foods, consider their textures: the crunch of fried dough, the chew of dried fruit, the tang of aged cheese. Hear the clatter of knives and the sizzle of fat. Smell the honeyed sweetness mingling with smoky meat. This is medieval junk food, messy, hearty, inventive, and undeniably human. You might chuckle imagining medieval kids tossing honey cakes at each other like soft little missiles during festivals. Food fights were a thing even then. Or picture a weary traveler biting into a greasy piece of ale-soaked bread, grimacing at the smell but thankful for the warmth it provides against the biting cold. There's even evidence that some snacks doubled as medicine, or at least what they believed was medicine. The fennel seeds with their licorice bite were thought to soothe digestion. Sweetened herbs and spiced nuts were considered good for the soul as much as the stomach. And don't forget, food was power and status. While peasants ate what they could forage or afford, the nobles enjoyed richer, spicier, and often sweeter snacks. Yet, even among the elite, the joy of a crisp fried cake or a chunk of fresh cheese was universal. Medieval junk food was a mix of necessity, culture, and occasional indulgence. It was the crispy warmth on a cold day, the sweet moment in a bitter life, and the messy proof that even centuries ago, people knew how to snack with style. So, as you rest your head tonight, maybe imagine the crackle of a fire, the scent of frying dough, and the shared smiles over a simple snack, because behind every great history is a story of hunger and comfort, and sometimes a little bit of grease. As you step deeper into the medieval world of snacks, your senses sharpen. The smells, sounds, and textures swirl around you like an ancient symphony of flavor and survival. Now, imagine a bustling market square at dawn, where vendors set up wooden carts and open fires, the air alive with anticipation. Among the most beloved and simplest treats you'll encounter here are the apple fritters crispy, golden pockets of fried dough speckled with chunks of tart fruit. These humble cakes are the medieval answer to your modern donut, minus the glossy glaze but packed with flavor and history. The idea of frying dough is nothing new. People have been experimenting with batter and hot oil for centuries. But what makes these apple fritters especially fascinating is the story behind their ingredients and preparation. Apples weren't available all year round. They had their season, and sugar luxury itself was reserved for the fortunate few. So cooks had to make do, often relying on the natural tartness of the fruit and a dash of honey when they could afford it. Sometimes, the fritters came out too chewy or overcooked. Sometimes the apples were more sour than sweet. But when they hit the mark, one bite transported you beyond the grim realities of medieval life. Now, these fritters were more than just street food. They were comfort, a small rebellion against the monotony of stale bread and watery stew. Imagine the sound as you bite into one, the crunch of the fried dough, the soft burst of apple, the lingering sweetness that follows. It's easy to see why medieval folk could forgive the hardships of their world for a taste like this. But fritters weren't the only snack stealing the show. Picture small lumps of fresh cheese, somewhat squeaky and inconsistent in texture. These were the cheese curds of the day, the medieval popcorn for those craving a quick bite. Unlike modern cheese that melts and stretches, these curds had a humble charm, offering a mild tang and a satisfying chew, sold in bundles by market women or made fresh at home. Cheese curds were an accessible treat, bridging the gap between necessity and indulgence. Turnips, on the other hand, would make for a more divisive ingredient. Imagine someone looking at a humble, white root vegetable and thinking, what if this could be pie? It sounds odd, maybe even unpleasant by today's standards. But in a world where sugar was precious and fresh, fruit scarce, culinary desperation sparked creativity. Turnip pies were born, mashed turnips blended with egg, honey, or dried fruit, all wrapped in thick pastry to keep the filling warm and protected. Sometimes these pies were surprisingly good, offering a subtle sweetness beneath the earthy base. The meat filling of these pies tells another story, one of adaptability and resourcefulness. If you lived near a manor, you might enjoy pork, mutton, or venison, real recognizable meat. But for many, the variety expanded wildly. Rabbit, pigeon, eel, or even hedgehog found their way into pies. The goal was simple. No part of the hunt went to waste, and no ingredient was too strange if it kept you fed. Seasoning was key. Fennel seeds, with their licorice-like bite, were used liberally, despite their divisive taste. Candied fennel seeds had a dual purpose. They masked strong flavors and aided digestion. People believed fennel could soothe an upset stomach, especially after heavy, greasy meals involving 3 or more courses of meat. You can almost imagine a medieval diner politely chewing a fennel seed, nodding in thanks as the bittersweet flavor settled in. Honey cakes were another staple, especially popular at feasts and festivals, dense, sticky, and durable. These cakes could be made ahead of time and transported easily, surviving rough handling and even mild food fights at celebrations. They weren't just food, but messages, sometimes used as gifts or even as subtle insults wrapped in sweetness. Here, I made this for you. It's sweet, unlike your personality. For sailors and peasants, these cakes were practical as well as tasty, sold outside taverns or packed on long journeys. Honey cakes provided sustenance and a bit of morale in tough times. Despite their simplicity, they carried a cultural weight that transcended their ingredients. Imagine the bustling tavern scenes peasants gathered, trading stories over mugs of ale, feeding each other bites of sticky honey cake, the air thick with laughter and the scent of roasting meat. Food here was as much about community as nutrition. Bread soaked in ale, called albread, was another comfort food. Though it had its drawbacks, it could get mushy and smell strong. It was a staple for chilly evenings by the fire. Eating albread quickly was essential. Left too long, it turned into a soggy mess. Yet nothing warmed you better in the cold than a slice of albread mush and a moment of peace. Dried fruits were a medieval convenience store staple. Raisins, figs, dates, and imported prunes were prized for their longevity rather than their taste. The texture was tough and chewy, often threatening to damage teeth, but these fruits provided much-needed sweetness and energy during lean seasons. Preservation was an art, and drying fruits was a way to cheat time itself. And then came the blood pancakes, a dish that might make modern palates cringe but was beloved by all social classes. Made from fresh animal blood mixed with oats, onions, and fat, shaped into patties, and fried until crispy. These protein-rich orbs packed a flavorful punch. They could be eaten plain, layered with cheese, dipped in broth, or sweetened with honey. They were quick, filling, and democratic nobles, peasants, monks, and merchants alike enjoyed them. The textures, flavors, and ingredients of medieval junk food tell a story of a world that balanced scarcity with celebration. Wafers, thin and fragile, were treats reserved for special occasions. They shattered easily and were challenging to transport, making their consumption a delicate affair. Despite this, wafers symbolized refinement and joy alike, crispy delight that could elevate a feast. Finally, fried eel stood out as a grand finale of sorts. Crispy, rich, and surprisingly popular. Fried eel combined the practical need to use available resources with a flair for indulgence. It was the kind of dish that filled bellies and left memories. This journey through medieval snacks reveals a complex world where food was survival, culture, medicine, and pleasure all rolled into one. The greasy, sweet, sour, and savory bites told stories of the land, the people, and their struggles and triumphs. And as you drift toward sleep, perhaps you'll dream of these flavors of smoky taverns, bustling markets, and the crackle of fire-cooked treats. Maybe, just maybe, you'll find a little comfort in knowing that the desire for a good snack is as old as hunger itself. Imagine yourself in the dim light of a medieval kitchen where the cook is pondering a problem that's as old as hunger itself: how to create something sweet and satisfying when sugar is a luxury. Apples are scarce, and resources are tight. Here, creativity dances with desperation, giving birth to the curious and sometimes surprisingly delightful turnip pie, a dish born not out of abundance, but necessity. Turnips, those humble root vegetables, often carried a reputation as the sad, bland sidekick to more glamorous fare. But someone, somewhere, dared to think differently. What if this sturdy, slightly bitter root could be transformed into a pie filling wrapped in a thick pastry crust? Mashed turnips mixed with eggs, honey, or dried fruits became a portable meal. The crust protected the filling from dirt, pests, and the not-so-pleasant realities of medieval dining, like an occasional peasant sneeze. The beauty of the turnip pie lies in its contradictions, earthy yet sweet, humble yet hearty. It was sometimes a disappointment, sometimes a revelation, a taste that could warm your hands and stomach during a cold evening. Think of it as the medieval version of comfort food, something to cling to when fresh ingredients were a luxury, and each meal was a triumph over scarcity. This pie also tells us about the social fabric of the time. While the nobles might have had lavish feasts with meats and exotic spices, the common folk had to make do, turning what they had into something nourishing. Turnip pies were a testament to this resilience, a culinary embodiment of making the best out of little. Of course, not all pies were filled with root vegetables. The definition of meat was elastic in the Middle Ages. If you were fortunate enough to live near a manor or hunting grounds, your pies might contain pork, mutton, or venison meats that were recognizable and prized. But for many, the filling was a wild card rabbit, pigeon, eel, even hedgehog might find their way into the mix. These animals, once alive and roaming or swimming nearby, were diced, seasoned, and hidden inside pastry to mask any unpleasant odors or flavors. Herbs and spices played a crucial role here. Fennel seeds, with their distinct licorice-like flavor, were popular despite or perhaps because of their divisive taste. You either loved them or quietly swallowed them whole, grateful for their digestive benefits rather than their flavor. Candied fennel seeds, coated in sugar, were sometimes served after meals to aid digestion and freshen breath, a medieval form of mint. This combination of unusual meats and potent herbs highlights the medieval palate's adventurousness and pragmatism. Food wasn't always about pleasure, it was about survival, health, and social display. To season a dish well was to show status and care, to make even the humblest ingredients worthy of a place at the table. Honey cakes were another sweet staple, beloved across social classes, dense, sticky, and sturdy. These cakes could be baked in advance and carried to feasts, festivals, or weddings without fear of spoiling quickly. They were resilient, able to withstand being dropped, stepped on, or even tossed during a playful food fight, beyond their practical use. Honey cakes were social tools, gifts to curry favor, bribes to sweeten deals, or, with a sharp enough wit, passive-aggressive statements wrapped in sweetness. Imagine handing someone a cake with the unspoken message. Here, enjoy this, unlike your personality. It's sweet. Sailors on long voyages lived off these honey cakes, their density and shelf life making them reliable sustenance when fresh food was scarce. Peasants, meanwhile, sold them outside taverns for a few coins, their sugary aroma tempting even the most hardened drinkers. Speaking of taverns, these were hubs of social life, places where stories, songs, and laughter flowed as freely as ale. Feeding drunk patrons something louder than their conversation was a skill in itself. Vendors needed snacks that were flavorful, filling, and could stand up to the rowdy atmosphere. Not all snacks were pristine. Sometimes the fish still had scales, or shapes curled in ways that made diners question their life choices. Yet, by medieval standards, these snacks were elegant in their own rustic way. Crispy, flavorful, and unlikely to cause illness, a small but significant comfort in a world where foodborne sickness was a constant threat. The smell, however, could be overwhelming. Allebread, bread soaked in ale, announced its presence before it was even seen. It didn't travel well and quickly lost its texture, turning into a soggy, porridge-like mass if left too long. But eaten fresh, it was a warm, nourishing treat perfect for a chilly evening by the fire. If you've ever looked at a slice of bread and thought, this would be better soaked in alcohol, congratulations, you and the medieval upper class share a taste. Dried fruits were another medieval snack phenomenon. Unlike today's soft, sweet treats, medieval dried fruits were tough, chewy, and not always pleasant to the palate. Their main job was to last, not to delight. Raisins, figs, dates, and imported prunes were sun-dried, smoked, or simply left forgotten until they hardened. Eating them was a test of endurance for teeth, but provided necessary sugars and energy when fresh fruits were unavailable. All these snacks paint a picture of a world where hunger was constant, resources were limited, and every bite was a balance of necessity and delight. Step further into the medieval kitchen, where the notion of meat stretches far beyond the familiar pork chops and roasted chicken we know today. The medieval diet was a tapestry woven with threads of necessity, regional availability, and sometimes pure survival instinct. Imagine the scent of fresh herbs mingling with the earthy aroma of game, where meats from the everyday to the exotic were minced, seasoned, and tucked into pies or skewered for roasting. If you were fortunate enough to reside near a manor house or a hunting estate, your diet might include pork, mutton, or venison, the kinds of meats that conjure images of grand feasts and noble tables. These were the prized proteins, recognizable and coveted, but for many, the reality was different, more complex, and often stranger. Think of the small rabbit darting through a hedgerow, the flutter of a pigeon's wings in a nearby field, or the slither of an eel in a muddy stream. These creatures, less glamorous perhaps, were vital sources of nourishment. Even hedgehogs, with their prickly exteriors, found their way onto plates, albeit carefully prepared. Medieval cooks were nothing if not resourceful, turning what was available into sustenance, no matter how unusual it might seem today. These meats were not simply roasted and served. They were transformed, minced into small pieces, mixed with aromatic herbs and spices, and folded into flaky pastry crusts. They became portable pies that travelers, peasants, and nobles alike could enjoy. The seasoning was essential not just for taste, but to mask the less than fresh qualities of some meats and to elevate humble ingredients into something memorable. Fennel seeds played a starring role in this culinary theater. Their strong, licorice-like flavor divided opinions. Some loved the sharp bite it added. Others quietly endured it, knowing it helped digestion and freshened breath. In a world without refrigeration, digestion was a delicate art, and herbs like fennel were medicinal as much as culinary. Candied fennel seeds, coated in sugar, were often served after meals, part palate cleanser, part digestive aid. They were the medieval equivalent of mints, sweet little packets of refreshment after heavy, greasy fare. This blending of flavor and function as a hallmark of medieval cooking food was nourishment, medicine, and ritual all at once. Honey cakes also embodied this blend, dense, sweet, and resilient. They were fixtures at feasts, weddings, and festivals, but beyond their taste, honey cakes were social instruments. They were gifts to curry favor, bribes to grease the wheels of politics, or veiled insults wrapped in sweetness. Picture a noble handing a cake to a rival, the gesture dripping with meaning. Here, enjoy this. It's sweeter than your manners. In bustling taverns, peasants sold these cakes for a few coins, their sticky texture offering a satisfying counterpoint to the bitter ale. Sailors packed them for long voyages, relying on their durability and calorie density. These humble cakes, in their resilience and sweetness, carried stories of hope and endurance. Medieval taverns were vibrant social hubs. The air buzzed with gossip, laughter, and music, all underpinned by the clinking of mugs and the smell of roasting meat. Vendors needed snacks that could stand up to this chaos crispy, flavorful morsels that could fuel stories and camaraderie. Yet, not all snacks were visually appealing. Sometimes fish came with scales still attached, shapes curled into unrecognizable forms, prompting diners to question their life choices. But these quirks were embraced, part of the rustic elegance of medieval fare. The smell of Albrecht bread soaked in beer was strong and unmistakable. It did not travel well. Left too long, it became a soggy, porridge-like mess, but freshly prepared. It was a warm comfort against cold nights, a humble luxury. Eating Albrecht was an exercise in appreciation for simple pleasures. If you ever thought bread soaked in alcohol sounded odd, welcome to the club of medieval connoisseurs. Dried fruits, meanwhile, were staples for long-term sustenance. Their chewy toughness was a challenge for teeth, but a boon for nutrition and shelf life. These preserved fruits, raisins, figs, dates, and prunes offered sweet relief during lean months, connecting people to faraway lands through trade. All these flavors and textures paint a vivid picture of medieval life, hard, unpredictable, but rich with ingenuity and joy. Step into the aromatic world of medieval spices and herbs, where the humble fennel seed reigns as a curious and controversial hero. Imagine the sharp, licorice-like tang hitting your palate, awakening senses dulled by simple fare. This was the power of fennel, an ingredient that did more than flavor. It carried medicinal weight and social significance. Loved by some, politely endured by others, fennel was both a taste and a statement. Medieval cooks harnessed fennel's dual nature. Its bold flavor could disguise the less desirable notes in heavily seasoned meats or game pies, transforming rustic meals into something memorable. At the same time, fennel was believed to settle the stomach after rich, fatty dishes, a vital consideration when refrigeration and hygiene were not what they are today. Candied fennel seeds, coated in sticky honey or sugar, were commonly offered at the end of meals, acting as primitive breath fresheners and digestive aids. Imagine a medieval diner popping a sugary seed into their mouth, savoring the blend of sweetness and herbal bite, nodding politely to their hosts as the flavors danced on their tongue. Historians still debate whether fennel's popularity was more medicinal than culinary. Was it a flavor people genuinely craved, or simply a necessary evil accepted for health benefits? Regardless, fennel's presence on medieval tables was unmistakable and enduring. Alongside fennel, honey cakes held a special place in medieval society. Dense and resilient, these cakes were staples at feasts, weddings, and festivals. But beyond sustenance, they were social tools, gifts to curry favor, bribes to smooth transactions, and even veiled barbs wrapped in sweetness. Picture someone handing over a honey cake with a sly grin and an unspoken jab. Here's something sweet, unlike your manners. In taverns and marketplaces, peasants sold honey cakes for a few coins, their sticky texture a perfect counterpoint to the bitter ale. Sailors packed them on long voyages, valuing their durability and energy density. These simple cakes carried stories of endurance, hope, and the sweet reprieve from daily struggles. The tavern itself was a sensory overload, murmurs of gossip, the clinking of mugs, smoky hearths, and the mingling aromas of roasting meats and spiced cakes. Snacks had to stand up to this chaos, crispy, flavorful, and satisfying. They were more than food. They were fuel for community and storytelling. Yet, not all snacks were refined. Some came with lingering fish scales or curled into shapes that made diners question their choices. But these quirks were embraced, part of the rugged charm of medieval cuisine. Allebread bread soaked in beer was another rustic favorite. Its strong aroma was unmistakable and divisive. Left too long, it turned into a soggy mush, but eaten fresh. It offered warmth and comfort against biting cold nights. Imagine biting into a piece of allebread, the bitter tang of beer soaking through dense bread, a humble luxury after a hard day. Dried fruits were vital staples, tough and chewy. They challenged teeth but ensured sweet energy during scarce seasons. Raisins, figs, dates, and prunes connected people across distances through trade and preservation techniques. Together, these ingredients and snacks reveal a medieval world where food was necessity, medicine, and celebration wrapped into one. It was a world of bold flavors, resilience, and humanity. Step into the lively world of medieval festivals and gatherings, where honey cakes take center stage not only as food, but as powerful social symbols. Imagine bustling crowds, colorful banners fluttering in the wind, and the hum of laughter and conversation weaving through the air. Amid this vibrant backdrop, honey cakes dense, sticky, and richly sweet are passed from hand to hand. Each bite more than just nourishment. It's a message. Honey was precious, a symbol of sweetness and goodwill, but also a subtle weapon. A honey cake given as a gift could smooth over a feud, grease the wheels of politics, or if delivered with a wink, serve as a sharp jab cloaked in kindness. Here, enjoy this sweetness, the giver might say, because, unlike you, it's pleasant to taste. These cakes were social currency, bridging divides or highlighting tensions with a delicious bite. In taverns, peasants sold these treats outside busy doors, enticing weary travelers and drinkers alike. The sticky aroma mingled with the scent of ale and roasting meat, creating a sensory tapestry that defined medieval social life. Sailors packed honey cakes for long voyages, relying on their durability and calorie richness to sustain them through storms and doldrums. The texture of these cakes was part of their charm, dense enough to satisfy hunger, sticky enough to linger on fingers and tongues. They weren't delicate, but that was the point. They could withstand the chaos of festivals, the occasional stumble, or even the playful food fights that erupted in celebration. Now imagine the role of these cakes beyond mere eating. In weddings, they were symbols of sweetness and prosperity. At feasts, tokens of hospitality. At markets, commodities that could be traded or bartered. Their presence was as much about connection as consumption. This dual nature of honey cake's food and message reflects a medieval society where every gesture, even culinary, carried layered meanings. It was a world where survival required wit and social savvy as much as strength. Meanwhile, taverns thrummed with energy. Patrons leaned in to share stories, their voices rising over the crackle of fires and the clinking of mugs. Food vendors needed snacks that matched this lively atmosphere, crispy, bold, and satisfying. Honey cakes met these demands, fueling conversations and camaraderie. But medieval food wasn't always refined. Some snacks still bore traces of their wild origin, scales clinging to fish pieces. Shapes curled in unfamiliar ways, reminders of the rustic, raw world behind the cooking pots. Yet these quirks were embraced, part of the charm that made every bite an adventure. The smell of Alabred bread soaked in ale was unmistakable. It could announce its arrival before the first bite, its aroma strong and divisive. Left too long, it became a soggy, porridge-like mess, but freshly prepared. It was a comforting staple for cold nights, a humble pleasure to warm hands and hearts. Dried fruits, raisins, figs, dates, and prunes were another essential. Tough and chewy, they challenged teeth but offered vital sweetness and sustenance during harsh seasons. Their preservation techniques connected people across distances, trading flavors and stories alike. Together, these elements weave a rich tapestry of medieval life where food was survival, celebration, medicine, and social language all at once. It was a world of texture, flavor, resilience, and human connection. So, as you listen and imagine, picture the sticky fingers, the laughter, the bold spices, and the warm fires. This is medieval junk food, not just sustenance, but a story of humanity itself. Picture a chilly medieval evening, where the glow of the hearth casts flickering shadows on stone walls, and the day's labors have finally come to a close. In this humble setting, a simple yet oddly comforting food awaits you a la bread. Imagine dense, coarse bread soaked generously in ale beer made from barley or wheat, and then warmed by the fire. The aroma is strong, a mixture of malted grains and a faint tang of fermentation. This is no delicate treat. It's a hearty, somewhat pungent food that announces its presence with unmistakable boldness. Alabread wasn't the kind of snack you'd casually nibble. It was survival food with character. Left too long, it turned into a soggy mush, unpleasant and unappetizing. But eaten fresh, it was a warm, nourishing refuge against biting cold nights. The idea of soaking bread in alcohol might sound odd to modern tastes, but for medieval folk, this was comfort food fuel for the body and balm for the spirit after a day spent battling the elements. Now imagine yourself breaking off a piece, the texture soft but still substantial, saturated with the deep, earthy flavors of ale. The taste is complex, a mix of bitterness and malt, underpinned by the yeasty aroma of fermented grains. This simple dish was especially popular among peasants and laborers, those who needed sustenance that was both filling and affordable. Alabread was also a practical way to use stale bread that might otherwise go to waste. Rather than throwing out hardened loaves, soaking them in ale softened the texture and added flavor, turning yesterday's bread into today's meal. This ingenuity reflects the medieval mindset. Nothing was wasted, and every resource was maximized. Picture the kitchen bustle. A cauldron of ale simmers over the fire, while stale bread is torn into chunks and submerged. Later, the soaked bread is fried in fat or baked until the edge is crisp, adding a delightful contrast to the soft interior. The result is a rustic dish, rich in calories and tradition. Of course, challah bread wasn't just about sustenance. It had social significance, too, shared around communal tables or in taverns. It was part of the fabric of medieval social life, a common thread connecting people across classes and regions. The warmth of the bread, combined with the camaraderie of sharing a meal, offered comfort that went beyond mere nutrition. Meanwhile, dried fruits played their own vital role in the medieval diet. Raisins, figs, dates, and prunes, often tough and chewy by today's standards, were essential for providing sweetness and energy during the long, harsh winters when fresh produce was unavailable. These fruits were sun-dried, smoked, or air-dried, sometimes for months, resulting in concentrated flavors that could challenge even the sturdiest teeth. Imagine biting into a leathery, sun-dried fig, its concentrated sweetness a reminder of the summer sun now long gone. These preserved fruits were often carried on long journeys, traded across regions, and incorporated into pies, stews, and sauces. Their durability made them invaluable, even if their texture required patience and perseverance. Dried fruits also had symbolic and medicinal uses. They were thought to aid digestion and provide vitality, connecting the physical and spiritual nourishment in medieval culture. Sometimes, they were candied with honey or sugar, elevating them from simple sustenance to luxurious treats reserved for special occasions. All these foods, challah bread, dried fruits, and more tell a story of resilience and adaptation. In a world where seasons dictated availability and preservation was an art, medieval people crafted a diet that was pragmatic but rich in flavor and meaning. So, as you settle deeper into this journey, imagine the crackle of a fire, the sweet tart chew of dried figs, and the hearty warming bite of ale-soaked bread. These were not just snacks. They were lifelines in a world where every meal was a victory over hunger and hardship. Step with me now into the rugged terrains and winding trade routes of medieval Europe, where dried fruits played the role of precious cargo longevity and sustenance wrapped into chewy packages. Unlike the tender, sugar-coated delights of today's snack aisles, these were fruits that had been sun-dried, smoked, or left hanging until they hardened into dense, aggressive morsels. Imagine biting into a leathery, almost stubborn raisin or a dried fig, where sweetness was a distant promise but resilience was everything. The primary purpose of dried fruits was not culinary finesse, but survival. Fresh fruits were seasonal and perishable, disappearing with the changing weather. Drying them was an ingenious preservation method that allowed communities to store essential nutrients for lean months. Think of these dried fruits as nature's emergency rations, portable, calorie-dense, and stable enough to endure long journeys or winter storms. The process itself was an exercise in patience and nature's cooperation. Sun-drying meant spreading fruits on mats or rooftops, leaving them vulnerable to weather, animals, and thieves. Smoke drying added a layer of flavor, infusing the fruits with earthy notes, but also creating textures far from delicate. Sometimes, fruits were simply forgotten on windowsills until they shriveled into oblivion, only to be rediscovered as tough, dark snacks. These preserved fruits were staples among merchants, travelers, and peasants alike, fueling arduous journeys or daily labors. Their tough texture could wear down teeth, and biting into them demanded a resolve bordering on endurance. Yet, the energy they provided was worth every chewed moment. Raisins, figs, and dates were the most common, with prunes making rare appearances often imported at great expense, reserved for the wealthy or special occasions. Despite their rough textures and muted flavors, these fruits symbolized a connection to distant lands and the bounty of nature, even in harsh times. Interestingly, medieval dried fruits often appeared in savory dishes, mingling with meats and spices in pies or stews. This blending of sweet and savory was a hallmark of the era's palate, contrasting sharply with the more segmented flavors of modern cuisine. The tartness of dried fruits balanced rich meats, creating complex layers that danced on the tongue. Behind every dried fruit was a story of trade and exchange. From Mediterranean fig orchards to northern European markets, these fruits traversed borders and cultures. They were a testament to early globalization, carried by caravan, ship, and cart over thousands of miles, binding disparate peoples through the universal language of food. For the common folk, dried fruits were rare treasures, sometimes hoarded or rationed carefully. For nobles, they were symbols of status, their presence on banquet tables a sign of wealth and far-reaching influence. The consumption of these fruits was as much about social signaling as it was about nutrition. As you imagine this, picture a merchant unpacking a crate of dried figs in a bustling market, the sun glinting off their wrinkled skins. Nearby, a traveler breaks open a bundle of dates, their sticky sweetness a brief respite from the dust and cold. In village kitchens, mothers ration dried raisins to their children, careful to make the sweetness last. Preservation was key, but so was ingenuity. Medieval cooks used dried fruits not only for sustenance but as flavor enhancers, integrating them into recipes that balanced the scarcity and abundance of their times. The dried fruit's tough exterior belied the bursts of sweetness within, much like life itself in the medieval world, rough on the surface, but full of moments of joy. So, as you reflect on your own snacks, perhaps a chewy raisin or a sun-dried apricot, remember that you're tasting echoes of history. These humble fruits carried the weight of seasons, journeys, and survival. They remind us that food is never just food. It's memory, culture, and resilience baked into every bite. Step cautiously now into the more daring realms of medieval cuisine, where blood, that life-giving fluid, was transformed from taboo to treasured ingredient. Imagine the crackling heat of a hearth, the rhythmic chopping of onions and herbs, and the thick, dark liquid of fresh animal blood being mixed with oats and spices to create something both nourishing and, to modern sensibilities, startling blood pancakes. These pancakes were not a delicacy reserved for the elite. They were the democratic meal of medieval life. Peasants, nobles, monks, and merchants all shared in the sustenance offered by these protein-packed orbs. Blood, most commonly from pigs but occasionally from other animals, was combined with oats and accessible grain and flavorings like onions and herbs to form a sticky, rich batter, once shaped into patties. These were fried in sizzling fat until the outsides crisped with a satisfying crunch, a texture that announced their arrival before the first bite. The taste was earthy, robust, and deeply comforting, a far cry from the bland staples of many medieval diets. Variations abounded. Some layered these pancakes with cheese, others dunked them in savory broths, and some simply rolled them up for a quick meal on the go. Sweet versions existed too, with a splash of honey adding a luxurious counterpoint to the rich blood flavor. Ale was sometimes mixed into the batter, lending a subtle tang that brightened the dense texture. Picture a crowded medieval tavern, patrons trading stories over mugs of ale, sharing bites of these warm, hearty pancakes. For many, they were a staple of daily life, providing vital protein and calories needed to endure hard labor and long days. The cultural significance of blood pancakes extended beyond mere nutrition. They were symbols of thrift and respect for the animal, ensuring nothing was wasted, a vital mindset in a world where resources were precious. Their preparation required skill and knowledge, turning what might have been discarded into a delicacy. Yet, blood pancakes were not without their challenges. Their strong flavors and dense textures could be divisive. Some diners approached them with eagerness, while others faced them with suspicion. The sight of dark, glistening pancakes might have startled the uninitiated, but to the medieval palate, they were comfort food par excellence. This dish also illustrates the pragmatic nature of medieval cooking. No ingredient was off limits if it could sustain life. Blood pancakes exemplify the blend of necessity and creativity that defines much of the era's cuisine. As you imagine the scene, consider the sizzle of fat in a pan, the aroma of onions mingling with iron-rich blood, and the communal joy of sharing a meal that nourished body and spirit. These pancakes carried the weight of survival, tradition, and social connection. In the broader context, blood pancakes stand as a testament to human adaptability and the deep connections between food, culture, and identity. They remind us that what is considered unusual or unpalatable today was once a source of life and comfort. So as you savor this story, perhaps you'll appreciate the layers of history baked into every bite of resourcefulness, community, and the enduring human spirit. Step now into the delicate world of medieval wafers, thin, brittle, and as fleeting as a whispered secret. Picture the careful hands of a baker, rolling out dough so fine it almost dances on air, then baking it until crisp, fragile enough to shatter at the slightest touch. These wafers were far more than mere snacks. They were symbols of celebration, refinement, and fleeting joy. In an age when food was often dense and hearty, wafers offered a lightness that delighted the senses. Their texture was fragile, cracking if you looked at them wrong, shattering if you tried to break them neatly. Storing and transporting wafers was a challenge. They demanded care and precision, making eating them a special occasion. Imagine a medieval feast, where wafers were passed around on silver trays, sometimes embossed with religious symbols or gilded with edible gold leaf. They were treats for the privileged, a small luxury that complemented rich wines and ornate desserts. Guests would take a delicate piece, smile politely, and inwardly regret not helping themselves to more. For common folk, wafers were often the stuff of kitchen-side longing. They might watch from the sidelines, sneaking a lick from a spoon if no one was looking, savoring the rare sweetness. The making of wafers required skill and patience. Bakers relied on intuition, tradition, and oral wisdom. Since microscopes and thermometers were centuries away, they mastered the art of balance ingredients, heat, and timing to create wafers that were crisp yet melt in the mouth. These wafers were more than food. They were ceremonial, served at weddings, religious festivals, and courtly events. They symbolized purity, transience, and celebration. To receive a wafer was to partake in a moment of grace. Historians debate how widespread wafer consumption was, but their cultural importance is clear. They represent an early form of the delicate pastry arts that would evolve into the sophisticated desserts we enjoy today. Imagine holding a wafer, feeling its delicate crunch, tasting the subtle sweetness that lingers on the tongue. It's a brief escape from the weight of medieval life, a moment of lightness and pleasure. Wafers remind us that even in the toughest times, people sought beauty and joy in their food. They cherished fleeting moments of delicacy amid daily hardship. So, as you imagine these fragile treats, think of the baker's hands, the candlelit halls, and the smiles of guests savoring a sweet, crispy piece of history. Imagine the bustling medieval marketplace or the warm, smoky corner of a tavern where the final treat on our journey, fried eel, makes its grand entrance. It's the dish that carried both sustenance and a touch of the exotic to the tables of commoners and nobles alike. Picture long, slender fish, slick and wriggling moments ago, now transformed into crispy, golden morsels that crackle with promise as you bite into them. Fried eel was a favorite among those who sought a filling yet flavorful snack. The preparation was simple but precise, cleaned, sliced, and battered with a mixture that could include flour, herbs, and sometimes eggs, before being plunged into hot fat to achieve a perfect crispness. The aroma that wafted through kitchens was irresistible, a blend of rich oils, fresh fish, and the subtle kiss of herbs. The eel's texture was a beautiful contradiction, tender and moist on the inside, with a satisfyingly crunchy exterior. Eating fried eel was a sensory delight that contrasted with the often heavy and bland staples of the medieval diet. Fishermen and market vendors knew the value of eel not just as food, but as commerce. Eels could be caught in rivers, estuaries, and even by the coast, making them accessible to many. They became an economic linchpin in some regions, their sales supporting livelihoods and local economies. In taverns, fried eel was sold as a quick, affordable snack to accompany ale. It was a food that met the demands of hungry workers, travelers, and revelers, easy to eat with fingers. satisfying, and rich in energy. Beyond its culinary appeal, fried eel carried cultural significance. In some areas, eel festivals celebrated the harvest of this slippery treasure, blending food, community, and tradition. It was a dish that united people, from fishermen to nobles, in shared appreciation. Historians debate how widespread fried eel consumption was, but its presence in records and art suggests it was beloved. It's a dish that embodies the medieval blend of practicality and indulgence, a snack born of natural bounty, elevated by human skill. So, as you imagine biting into a crispy piece of fried eel, feel the crunch, the juicy tenderness, and the satisfaction of a snack that kept bellies full and spirits high in a world often harsh and unforgiving. This is the grand finale of medieval junk food, a dish that captures the essence of survival, flavor, and community. Imagine yourself lying within the sacred walls of an ancient temple, where flickering candlelight casts gentle shadows upon cold stone, and the air is thick with the scent of incense and whispered prayers. This is no ordinary sleep. It is a ritual known as dream incubation, where the faithful seek healing and guidance through divine visions in their slumber. Pilgrims of all kinds, the sick, the hopeful, and the desperate gather in these hallowed places, believing that their dreams will carry messages from the gods, ancestors, or spiritual doubles. At the heart of this practice stood Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine. Temples called Asclepieia dotted the ancient Greek world, from Epidaurus to Pergamon, serving as sanctuaries where the ill would lie down in sacred chambers called abata, awaiting a healing dream. The experience was carefully prepared through purification rituals, fasting, and offerings, transforming sleep into a sacred appointment with the divine. But this practice was far from exclusive to Greece. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Anatolia, similar rituals unfolded, blending local beliefs with shared spiritual themes. The Phrygian cult of Men, the moon god associated with healing and prophecy, cultivated a rich tradition of dream incubation, where visions were interpreted as celestial communications. Scholars still debate whether the healing power of these dreams came from divine intervention or from the mind's own mysterious workings, harnessed by faith and ritual. Regardless, the impact of dream incubation was profound, influencing medicine, religion, and social life. Prophetic dreams held immense sway beyond healing. They were seen as glimpses into the future, warnings, revelations, or calls to action that could alter personal and political destinies. Kings, generals, and prophets sought such dreams to guide decisions and affirm divine favor. The ancient Hebrews, too, valued prophetic dreams, with numerous biblical accounts chronicling visions that shaped history. In Anatolia, syncretic traditions fused Hittite, Phrygian, and Greco-Roman elements to sustain a vibrant culture of dream healing. By the 2nd century CE, dream interpretation matured into a scholarly discipline. Artemidorus of Daldis composed the Onera Critica, a comprehensive manual approaching dreams not as mystical riddles, but as texts to decode, providing insights into psychology and prophecy alike. Yet, not all dreams were welcome. Nightmares, believed to arise from restless spirits or malevolent forces, were feared cosmic warnings reminding humanity of its vulnerability. Dreams, both divine gifts and dark omens, bridged the seen and unseen worlds. Dreams also served as political tools. Rulers and priests wielded them to legitimize power, proclaiming that their authority was heaven-sent. Whether genuine revelation or savvy propaganda, dreams became currency in ancient statecraft. Though temples have crumbled and priests long silenced, the legacy of ancient dream practices endures, whispering through psychology, culture, and our own nighttime reveries. As you close your eyes tonight, consider this: dreams are not random. They are stories and signals, shadows cast by gods, ancestors, and your deepest self. The timeless question remains: what is your dream trying to tell you? Imagine the vast, untamed frontiers of 19th century America, a land stretching endlessly under wide open skies, where danger lurked behind every ridge and the future was as uncertain as the next sunrise. In this raw, restless landscape, communication was a lifeline. Yet the distances were immense and the terrain unforgiving. Enter the Pony Express, a daring enterprise that would revolutionize how news and messages raced across the continent. Founded by three visionary businessmen, William H. Russell, Alexander Majors, and William B. Waddell, the Pony Express was a marvel of logistics and courage. They devised a relay system of riders and horses, stationed approximately every 10 to 15 miles, to carry mail swiftly from St. Joseph, Missouri, to Sacramento, California, a staggering 900-mile journey through plains, deserts, and mountains. Picture a young rider, barely 18, wiry and fearless, mounting a fresh horse under the early morning sky. With a specially designed mochila, a leather mail pouch strapped securely to the saddle, he races off into the wild unknown, changing horses at each relay station without pause. His journey is perilous. Sudden storms turn rivers into torrents. Packs of wolves stalk at night, and bandits lie in wait. These riders were often orphans or men with nothing to lose, drawn by the promise of adventure and a chance to serve their country. The famous recruitment posters called for young, skinny, wiry fellows, willing to risk death daily. Their speed and endurance were legendary. They could ride up to 100 miles in a single shift, braving the elements and terrain with unwavering resolve. The Pony Express wasn't just about mail, it was about connection. Letters, newspapers, and telegrams reached Californians in days rather than weeks, knitting the vast country together. Business deals flourished, families stayed in touch, and the Union's fragile unity was bolstered at a time when civil war loomed. Yet the Pony Express was short-lived. With the completion of the transcontinental telegraph in 1861, its role was eclipsed overnight. The rhythmic clatter of hooves was replaced by the clicking of Morse code, and the brave riders faded into legend. But the legacy endures. The Pony Express became a symbol of American daring, perseverance, and the relentless human spirit striving to connect across vast distances. Figures like Pony Bob Haslam and Buffalo Bill Cody became folk heroes, embodying the mythos of the Wild West. As you listen, imagine the thunder of hooves across dusty trails, the sharp crackle of gunfire in the distance, and the pounding heart of a rider racing against time. This was more than mail delivery. It was a testament to courage, innovation, and the power of connection in a rugged, untamed world. Picture yourself transported back over 4 millennia to ancient Mesopotamia, where the goddess Ninkasi reigns not just as a deity, but as a symbol of life's daily pleasures. In this cradle of civilization, brewing beer was both a practical craft and a sacred art, a ritual woven into the very fabric of society. Imagine clay tablets etched with hymns praising Ninkasi, verses that not only honor her but also serve as step-by-step guides to creating the foamy, nourishing drink that sustained kings and commoners alike. The process began with barley bread, known as bapir, baked hard and dry, often sweetened with honey or dates. This bread was crumbled into water-filled jars, where natural yeast, mysterious and unseen, transformed the mixture through fermentation. The result was a thick, unfiltered brew, rich in flavor and nutrients, sometimes consumed with spoons rather than sipped, nourishing laborers and priests. Beer in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia was more than refreshment. It was a lifeline in arid lands where clean water was scarce and unreliable. Brewing required skill, tools, and cooperation, fostering division of labor and early technological innovation. Women, especially in Egypt, often led the brewing efforts, managing household production and commercial sales. Their expertise honored in tomb paintings and hieroglyphs. Temples brewed vast quantities of beer for daily offerings, intertwining the beverage with religious rituals. During festivals, myths like that of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess pacified by red-dyed beer, underscored beer's role as a divine force capable of taming wrath and chaos. Beer production also reflected social hierarchies. The finest brews were reserved for scribes, priests, and administrators, while common folk drank thicker, heartier versions. Across regions, distinct brewing styles and trade networks developed, linking communities and economies. Despite lacking modern science, ancient brewers relied on intuition, oral tradition, and spiritual reverence. Their methods laid foundations for the scientific brewing practices of later eras, echoing in cultural traditions that persist in rural communities worldwide. As you imagine this ancient ritual, feel the warmth of the brewing fires, smell the sweet tang of fermenting grain, and hear the murmurs of prayers mingling with the bubbling brew. Beer was more than a drink. It was a force that shaped civilization, faith, and daily life. So tonight, as you close your eyes, raise an imaginary cup to the goddess Ninkasi and the timeless craft that has brought joy and sustenance through the ages. As your journey through time and taste draws to a gentle close, take a deep breath and let the images of flickering hearths, bustling medieval markets, and quiet temple chambers fade softly into the background. Imagine the comforting warmth of a freshly baked honey cake melting slowly on your tongue, or the gentle crunch of a crisp wafer dissolving delicately in your mouth. These flavors, though centuries old, carry the timeless essence of human resilience and joy. Close your eyes and feel the quiet peace of a chilly evening by the fire, the crackle of logs blending with the distant murmur of voices sharing stories and laughter. Let the scent of spiced meats and sweetened fruits lull your mind into calmness. Remember that across ages and cultures, people have sought the same comforts in food, the same moments of connection and solace. Now, imagine the gentle whispers of dreams, weaving through ancient temples and humble homes alike, carrying messages of hope, healing, and wisdom. As you breathe slowly, let those whispers wrap around you like a soft blanket, soothing away the day's worries and inviting restful sleep. Tonight, you are not alone. You walk alongside countless souls who found light in simple pleasures, warm bread, sweet honey, and the sacred language of dreams. As your eyelids grow heavy and the world softens around you, carry this warmth in your heart. Rest well, dear traveler. The past's gentle embrace holds you close. Tomorrow is another journey. But for now, surrender to the calm and drift peacefully into dreams.